good.
Yeah, I unmuted everyone. I want everyone to talk. Okay. Okay. I think we all know Amina now. But I just want to say she is so accomplished that I want to say a few things about, if I can, and not take up the whole time, Amina, with all your awards. Let's see. Amina Gautier is the author of 4 short story collections. At Risk was awarded the Flannery O'Connor, Eric Hoffer, and First Horizon Awards. Now We Will Be Happy was awarded the Prairie Schooner Book Prize in Fiction, the International Latino Book Award, and the Royal Palm Literary Award. It was a finalist for the William Saroyan International Prize. The Loss of All Things Lost.
The Loss of All Lost Things.
Thank you. I'm a little confused now. Okay. Received the Alexa Press Award in Fiction, the Phyllis Wheatley Award, and was a finalist for the Hurston Wright Award, the Patterson Prize, the John Gardner Award, and shortlisted for the SFC Literary Prize. Her work has been supported by many foundations and literary centers. I think this is your last collection, right? The 4th one?
Yes.
Okay, that one I don't have. It's the best that you can do. And it recently won the Soft Skull Convilio Publishing Prize. Very recently. She has, I don't know how many short stories. I know that it's
150.
Okay, 150 short stories have been published in top literary journals. For her body of work, Amina has received the Blackwell Prize, the Chicago Public Library Foundation's 21st Century Award, and the Penn-Malamud Award for Excellence in the Short Story. She is Associate Professor of English at the University of Miami, where she is the Gamelli Senior Scholar. Amina. Yeah, what do we say after that?
Thank you.
No,
I'm
not
actually
you.
a full
It's the
professor
rest.
now.
What is that?
I'm actually a full professor now.
Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
a big accomplishment.
So
Okay, thank
I
you.
just
Go
want to
ahead.
apologize for all the computer electronic kerfuffle. So I'm sorry that I'm starting late, Sharyn.
No, that's okay. We can go over a little bit.
Okay.
Okay.
So Sharyn doesn't have the book yet because it just came out last week. It was published on January 16th. And I'm just going to read maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs from A Whole New World, which is the story that is in the What's Next collection, and just talk for 2 or 3 minutes about what I'm thinking about, and then enjoy the rest of the time talking with you all. So, A Whole New World. No one is going to miss you. After 4 years of teaching in the English department at Deschantel, a Catholic university on the north side of Chicago, you're leaving the Midwest for a major research institution in South Florida. For the past 3 months, you've kept this news to yourself, keeping your lips sealed as you waited for the contract to be negotiated, the paperwork to be processed, your fall courses to be scheduled, and the whole thing to become official. You wait until the last day of finals at the end of the spring quarter. With teaching done and nothing but grades to turn in, your almost former fellow faculty gather to shake off the school year. You attend the end of the year party to deliver the news and say your goodbyes in person. The party's in full swing when you arrive. The conference room isn't big enough for all of the department's tenure track faculty, admins, and adjuncts, so everyone attends in shifts, rotating in and out. As your colleagues crowd around the cold cuts, crudités, and cubes of cheese, you make the rounds to say farewell. Even though you've been on sabbatical all year and you haven't seen anyone in ages, no one asks how you've been or says long time no see. To your news, they say, Nadia, it's all so sudden, which is true. You weren't even on the job market when you were recruited and made an offer you couldn't refuse. Don't reveal the offer. nobody likes a sore winner. So I'll stop there and sort of say that some of the things that interested me in working on this story was thinking about the ways that we frequently hurry past each other, even when we're trying to connect. That a lot of times we're not really listening to hear what the next person has to say so much as we are listening for our chance to respond. And, we're sort of pre-creating our words and basing what we want to say on sort of presumption. So in this story, a lot of assumptions are being made about what Miami is like, this idea of thinking of a predominantly Spanish-speaking place in the United States as a foreign or international space, even though it's on land that used to be owned by Mexicans and indigenous peoples where Spanish was already spoken, right? And presuming that the narrator has no Latino background, and therefore she's going to feel uncomfortable going to that space, presuming that anyone who owns property can't afford to keep it if they're not living in it and has to be renting it out. There are a lot of moments in the story where people are just sort of saying, like, why don't you feel the way I feel? Why aren't you doing what I would be doing if I were in your space? Rather than figuring out like how we're different and what interests us. So it's just a little tiny moment of exploring something that concerns me on a larger scale when I think about what's next. And obviously I wrote this story several years ago, before this onslaught of technology, which makes me wonder more and more what will continue to happen when we stop engaging and we stop listening and we just continue to hurry past one another to get to the next thing, or we think that we can take a person in with a quick snapshot, that we can just talk to them for 2 or 3 minutes and presume we know like who they are, what they're about, what they want, and where they're going. So what I'm interested in when thinking about like what's next is, where can we find spaces to sort of slow down and engage when everything around us is encouraging us to be distracted. So those are my thoughts with how this particular story fits into what I'm thinking about currently.
It seems that it's not only the distractions, but it's also those preconceived notions that we have about each other that feed into those distractions. Part of it is, when you were saying that, I was feeling too, part of it is that the narrator or the you character is also cut off, is also not part of the conversation, because I just wonder if her colleagues would have known more about her if she had said something. Do you see what I mean? So is this on all sides? Do we all have some responsibility to open up? Do you see what I'm getting at?
No, you mean that if in the 4 years of her working there, she told them she was Latino?
No, it seems she doesn't have any friends at all. She's very isolated in a world where she has no interaction with the people that are her so-called colleagues. And you don't have a feeling that she even has one person or friend that she lives in a sort of like box, it seems, from the way she talks.
Right. And I think that sabbatical can do that to you. You take a year off to sort of like isolate and be on fellowship, which is why I think it's interesting that they haven't seen her in a year because she's been on sabbatical, and they don't ask her anything so much as they just want to know what she's going to do with her property. Right. Like if she's been away for a year and she shows up at the party, like that would be an opportunity to sort of ask, like, hey, how was your sabbatical? How was your research going? And they're like, so you going to sell this property or not? Chuck?
Yeah. I really like this story. I mean, I think it's
You
very
have great
effective.
taste.
Hmm?
You have great
Excuse me?
taste.
I couldn't hear you, Stephanie.
Not me. She said you have great taste.
Oh, I see. Okay, great. I just have a craft question, and we both have stories in Sharyn's anthology, and they're both second person. And I'm just curious about why you chose second person as opposed to first or even third. In terms of craft, in terms of the experience of the reader, what would you say are the advantages of second person, which is not used all that often? I've written maybe 5 stories, but you don't see it come up often.
Yeah, this is great. Second person is a point of view that is near and dear to my heart. I was very fortunate to be attending creative writing classes in the late 90s, where I think there was already a foundation being laid for writers to be accepted to publish in second person. But it says the host would like me to unmute.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, no, no.
Oh, no, that's
Keep-
probably
keep-
your phone, so don't worry about that.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. So when I got to the creative writing classes at Stanford in the mid 90s, I'd read, I think it was late 90s, I'd read Junot Diaz's How to Date a Black Girl, Brown Girl, White Girl, Happy, in his collection Drown. Julie Oranger had a second person story, Notes to a Sixth Grade Self. But before that, I'd read Jamaica Kincaid's Girl in high school, which is, of course, in second person, is the 746 word short story that's all second person. But I was interested in second person just from being a teenage girl and reading the sort of self-help portions of 17 magazine and YM, where girls would write in and they'd ask for advice, and it would always be given in second person. So I didn't even know that it was, weird or strange or different to be attempting that point of view. It felt natural to me. I actually tried to draft. I wrote the first draft of a novel that it's not anywhere in print in second person, and they told me I couldn't do that. But for me, one of the things I'm interested in with second person is I like to use it when the character is speaking to themselves or their consciousness, and it feels really natural to me, like those moments where you're going through your day and you're like, why didn't I say that? Or, someone says something to you and you answer in a maybe polite, diplomatic way, but you're thinking something else and you're having a different, dialogue or conversation with your subconscious. And I think there are a lot of pitfalls and concerns around second person when people just sort of use it and think it's like easily exchangeable with first or third. First person, I think, sometimes gives writers the opportunity to over explain, right? To say every single thing that the first person character is thinking, which can sometimes lead to a lack of tension and conflict. If you can explain everything, or you can wipe away the explanation with, I don't know how I knew that. I just knew it. It was instinct. My spidey senses were tingling. And with third person, you obviously can have a narrator or an author come in and sort of create the situations and manufacture the scenes to get the tension. So for me, second person is like this Goldilocks moment where it's not too cold and it's not too hot, and you can feel that the character is moving through their lives and the situations are happening organically rather than being sort of manufactured by an author, which of course they are, but it doesn't necessarily have to feel that way. But the character is locked into this kind of conflict or tension between what they're observing and what they feel that they have to say or respond to, and what they're actually thinking. And those moments can change the direction in which a scene goes. And for me, that's when second person really works the best. It's just this loop, and the reader can feel that they are eavesdropping, right? They're just sort of listening in on a conversation that's not happening with them. I think second person could become incredibly intrusive when the reader is constantly forced to identify with the you, and it can feel like the narrator is sort of like poking you. You know, you do this, you do this, you do that, and the reader's like, I'm not doing any of that, right? So I love second person.
Good.
It's interesting to hear that you got some of that from a magazine, because as a former magazine editor, I'll tell you, we would try to include the reader with you, either implied or otherwise, because you would want to make it sound personal, and that's what it sounds like you were getting from 17 magazine.
And YM.
Oh, and why? Okay, YM. Yeah, women's magazines do that.
And I've written about maybe 12 to 15 second person stories now. Once I knew it was, allowed in creative writing classes, I had this like year-long spate where I went on like second person, odyssey, and like every story I wrote for like an entire year was in second person. And I wrote like 18 stories in second person. And of course, they all didn't need to be in second person, and only 2 of them I kept in second person, and the other 16 I revised and turned into first or third, because sometimes it can be too much of a good thing. You get excited by something and you just overdo it and you overwork it, and then you have to pull the reins and exercise some restraint.
Okay, there are a number of writers here, so I'm sure that they're interested in technique. When did you start? It sounds like you started in high school. Did you start writing then?
I started writing fiction my senior year in high school. Before that, I mistakenly thought that I was a poet. But I did write 1 or 2 very short stories in high school that I later revised in grad school that got published. But I started taking creative writing classes at Stanford my sophomore year, so 1996. And that's where I really learned the structure and the form of stories. Like I'd just been writing, what I had been writing before that were, I guess I would say like anecdotes or tales, but they weren't stories. Like they didn't have moments of dialogue or scene or conflict. They were just like long character descriptions. So I started taking workshops when I was 19.
Oh, okay. One of the things, if we're staying with technique just a little bit, is your use of foreign words, and how do you manage that? I think a lot of us, I mean, I grew up in New York City. I majored in Spanish and French literature, so the words are not foreign to me. But for some people, they might be. So how do you manage putting in other words that are not English, and in the story? How do you do that?
I just put them in.
You just put them in. I know. I that's how I'm reading it. And as I said, I didn't even notice that that's what they were, because I grew up hearing these words, even though it's not my background. I studied them. It was all around me in New York City. But with some other people, it might be a little bit difficult. Like in my novel, I used some Spanish words because I was writing about New York City and it was natural to do so. But in some cases, you feel the need to maybe explain some of the words.
Well, I think that is a choice that every writer will have to make on their own. And I think it's a choice that you can make for a certain book or a certain work and change your mind about later with another book and another work. So earlier in my writing, if I used Spanish words, I believe that I was encouraged to italicize them by editors, and I'm pretty sure like I went along with that because I had not developed any sort of artistic feeling about that yet. I no longer do that. I think that there are plenty of words in English that readers will come across in stories and may not understand if they come from a different class background. You know, like I remember reading Catherine Mansfield's Bliss in 6th grade. I didn't know what a perambulator was. No one explained that to me. I wasn't British, right? I was reading, John Cheever, and you get all these words that are about like upper class New England life, references to yachts and schooners and things that people who, are wealthy and well off to do will know off the bat, but people who speak English and maybe are poor and don't own their own ships, will not know. So I think that we are frequently using language to create inside and outside spaces, even if we're not using a different language, and thinking about, the ways that some of those stories and some of those different class backgrounds made me feel excluded, and I had to look things up and I had to work my way towards the center of the story. And I think that it's fine if readers feel that way with some of my stories because they don't know the language, and they can do the same work with my stories that they can do when they read Lord of the Rings or any, medieval fantasy where writers have created their whole languages and doesn't stop people from reading those works. With this story specifically, though, Sharyn, when you say like you didn't even notice, like that's part of the point, right? Because you get to that moment in the story where the narrator says that she's been living in Miami for 3 months and she doesn't notice until the 3rd month that only the 2 front desk people who work in the building are the only ones who are speaking English, right? It takes her 3 months to notice that like everyone but them is speaking Spanish.
Right, and also in the story you have most of the words in the context of food, so it's pretty easy to figure out, okay, it's some kind of food, even if you don't know what it is.
Yeah. And I do this, like I know a little bit of Spanish. I'm not fluent, even though I have, Puerto Rican background, but I don't only do it with Spanish. There are stories where I've included words from Kiswahili. There are stories where I've included words from Latin, and there are stories where I've included words from Portuguese, if I thought that those were integral to the story.
Okay, I see Meredith has a hand up.
Well, I just was going to confess that yes, you Amina, you sent me to the dictionary. So I learned aceituna. I guess that's an olive.
Yes,
And
aceituna.
And pilon, a mortar and pestle. And I'm still not sure I know a really good definition of bochinchera. It said gossip.
Yes.
That's
okay.
So
anyway, I'm a lover of words, and it was fun, and it was different. And it did. I had to pause and look up a few things. I'd heard of maduros before, and yes, Sharyn, I love food. So if you're going to be talking about some food, I want to know what is that? Okay, plantains, fried sweet plantains.
Sweet ones, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, because the non-sweet ones are tostones.
Yes.
I'm glad that you went to the dictionary, and I think more readers should do that. I guess, I confess my age when I say things like that, but I'm Gen X, so you didn't know a word, you ask your parents and they say, look it up, go to the dictionary. It's like, if you don't know something, look it up.
Yes.
Google it. It's easier.
Yeah, you can do that now.
Many kids don't even have dictionaries anymore. They just Google everything.
No, or you can get a dictionary online. It's pretty simple. No excuse, Amina.
No excuse. I mean, they have their phones, but they're still not always looking up things in the stories. We're reading and discussing. I'm like, so did you know this word? They're like, nope, I just skipped over it. Like that word might have been deep to the meaning of this story.
Yeah, in talking a lot about technique, and we can go back to it, but I want to talk about some of the issues that you bring up in the story, because I think they're important too. We have literary and global issues in this group. So with that, you have a lot. First of all, this character is Puerto Rican. She's American.
She's African American and Puerto Rican, yes.
Right, but I mean, her citizenship is American,
Yes.
US. So she's going to what other people are calling another country, but it really isn't another country because she's an American citizen. And so are a lot of the other people who are in this location where she's going. Wow, there are so many questions to ask about the change in demographics here. But is there anything, I'll ask you, is there anything you want to say about it since it's your story? And then we can go on from there.
Well, that's one of the things I was getting at when I was, talking about the way that people, presume things, that, yeah, Miami is clearly, part of the United States. But, it is a predominantly Latino space. And I have this moment in the story where, we're understanding that it's not just that there are so many Latinos, but that we're getting different socioeconomic groups of Latinos, right? So we're like her white colleagues are fine with Latinos who are working in the fields picking strawberries or who are driving taxis, right? But not who are they're doctors, lawyers, property managers. They're like, oh, they're running everything. Like that's the part, that makes them feel like it's a different space, right? That it's this different world. So there is a presumption, right, that all Latinos are immigrants, which of course is not true since, Puerto Ricans are born as US citizens, right? So there's a presumption that all Latinos are immigrants, and that because they are immigrants, that their entry into the United States must be a difficult one, and that they must be here to increase their economic prospects, right? Where you've got plenty of people in Miami who are, sort of rich and wealthy in Venezuela, Argentina, Colombia, and Peru, and they just like decided to buy a couple of condos, in Brickell to sort of like rent out and hang out. And that not all Latinos are struggling, right? So there are all these sort of layers of presumption that, come into that one line of dialogue. Oh, it's so different. It's a whole new world.
Right. That's
the assumption is that she'll be uncomfortable with it as well. Sorry.
No, I was looking at that. There's another one. Prepare yourself. It's nothing like here. It's the United States. Right.
But
Okay.
Kansas is nothing like here either. It's not just unique to Florida. I mean, some people, we're out here in the Pacific Northwest, and for us, I would have trouble with Oklahoma, maybe. I would have the same thing saying to myself that it's not what we're used to. And so I think it's more than just the language aspect. It's a lot of other things. It's values, it's assumptions about values as well.
Right. Well, yeah, I think there are a lot of assumptions here. One thing a little thing that I noticed in the part that you read in the intro, she's in an English department at a university that appears to have a French name. And with that, as far, I don't know, I think there's someone else here who might know better the history of Chicago, but I'll leave that, leave them alone about that. But at any rate, I think that there was a French influence in that region. And it's interesting to me that given the history of that region as being different, as being French oriented, how people, picking up on what Stephanie is saying, that each region is somewhat different in this country because of its history. So the history in the Southwest here and the history in Florida has the Spanish influence. So it goes without saying, this is the United States. This is what we are. This region, I think the Northwest, those of you who have been here longer than I have, it seems to have a Scandinavian influence. So, each region is somewhat different, and to pick out Miami as a different country because people are speaking Spanish there, it's odd to me.
We had a television show, Almost Live, that was done here. And they used to do a sketch that was hysterically funny in the opening with clocks of times around the world, and they'd have a time for Ballard. And then Freedom is on its own time, completely. So there are pockets of this city that are on their own cultural influences, just as you have in Chicago. You have a very large Irish population as well. And you have the South Side, you have all different pockets of ethnicities in Chicago as well, I think. So that's curious that she didn't interact with that cultural phenomena as well.
Well, but I don't know. I mean, Amina, you can, she's in a college environment, and those of us who have taught at universities know that sometimes that creates its own little neighborhood, so to speak. You don't necessarily find yourself going outside of it to other places. New York is very much like that, Stephanie. You know that it's and that's where I grew up.
That's fun.
Yeah, I'm used to different neighborhoods for different people, and I'm also used to seeing different neighborhoods change. Like one ethnicity will move out, another one will come in. It's just in flux constantly. But getting back to Miami, and differences there, I think it's really important, Amina, that you brought up that we can't put in one category Latinos. I think that's very important because a lot of times that's part of the assumption. You say, oh, Latinos are this voting bloc. Latinos are, as you were, Stephanie, I understand. I'm exaggerating. Or Latinos are, as you said, Amina, picking strawberries or something. Those assumptions, how do we get rid of them? Because the you character or the person who's saying you, the character who's using that, to be honest, is very much like you. And have you found that there's the misconceptions towards you because of who you are?
Well, yeah, like I said in the story, like it seems to depend on where I am. When I'm back home in New York, people just know I'm Black and something else, and presume it's Puerto Rican because a lot of Puerto Ricans in New York. When I'm in Chicago, like that's not there at all. Whenever I'm in Miami, I don't know what people think I am. Like maybe they think I'm Cuban or Dominican, and not necessarily Puerto Rican, but they speak Spanish to me right away. Whenever I land in Puerto Rico and people read my my ID, they look at my last name, which I think to a lot of people looks French, but it's not. It's a Puerto Rican last name, and they go, "Oh, Gautier," and they just start speaking Spanish. So, I think there are different ways where a place can work to contextualize you. I did want to just mention, we talked about like demographics, and demographics sort of changing, and that's another assumption like in the story, right? That Miami is becoming this Latino space, so what the character or the narrator is sort of getting at is, she says that she's in the country beneath this country, kind of like reminder to people, like who was in the US before the US was the US, right? That you had land that was inhabited by indigenous people and by Mexicans. So it shouldn't be strange that like Spanish is being spoken, since it was obviously being spoken here before English was.
Yes. That's very important. Does anyone else have anything to say? Some of you have been quiet. Tamarah, I can't hear you. Are you? No.
Oh, she can't unmute.
Oh, there we go. I got it.
Okay.
No, this actually is perfect because you started the first line so hard. You can't escape the first line. And I'm working on my own first lines. And so I'll just read this. I'm like, oh, well, that's how you do it. Okay. But it's so direct. No one is going to miss you. And so memory is going to be the thread that I'm going through with this. And it's the memory of so many things. It's not just heritage of the self and heritage of others, but it's this discovery of self as you go through these conversations. And I thought that I might be wrong, and I'm totally okay with that because I could be. But it just feels so optimistic about the self, because in the end, you have the last word for who you are. And that is so important. But what I thought was the most powerful thing about this was in the very beginning, she was dismissed and she felt invisible. She was gone. No one asked. No one thought to ask. It was a lot of the small talk and dismissive conversations that, like, everything they said, I have heard before. And it's just demoralizing as a person. And when you're like, I thought that we were working together, I thought that we knew each other at least a little bit. And it's very frustrating. So it's like my husband, I'm a poet, and I thought when I was in college that I was a marine biologist, and I was wrong. Science did not work with me. And it was my advisor. They're like, I think that you really need to go with your strengths. And so they pushed me into poetry, and then I got into publishing. And I'm just so much happier now than trying to figure out the chemistry class, because that didn't work. But when she is dismissed with these conversations, what I was going to say is my husband is in tech, and we were in Silicon Valley from the mid 90s to about 10 years ago. And it's so funny to me, being someone who's observant of how people interact with each other and the language that we use with each other. Silicon Valley, everyone has a wall. Everyone is their own startup. And the one thing that always stuck with me was they really nailed in, we're not friends. And so if I ask how they're doing, they're like, we're not friends and I don't need to tell you. And so I think that that's something that they think is okay to say. And just being a human in the world, I think, is going to be detrimental to culture and to society. So, but that's I mean, that's a big subject, but what I thought was the best part about this was the narrator forced herself to not be invisible in many ways. She's like, this is my home here, and this is what I'm choosing to do with my home. And this is what I plan to do with it in the future. And these are the foods that I use. These are the people that I hear. These are the people that I see. And it's this, I'm forcing myself to not be invisible. There are some people that are going to say, just stupid things of, I think that the worst one was it? I don't know how you can do it. I can't imagine a more dismissive thing to tell someone. It's not acknowledging yourself. It's not acknowledging your accomplishments. It's saying, I don't know how you can do it. It's just, I've heard that before, and I just can't stand it. And so by the end, when you finish with, exactly where you are, you're combining all of these observations that you are also forcing to not be invisible. And so it's this story of memory. And so that's how I read it more than anything else. And it's so nice that we see people in here who are outsiders. There's the people hawking the watchtower, but we know who they are. We know where they are. I run into them in Seattle whenever I go into town because I'm on an island, and so I'm on the ferry, and so they're always there, and they're nice. So
And she acknowledges them.
And she acknowledges them. It was just, all of this is, there are times when people are dismissive, when people don't see you, when people don't see the world around them. And it's so important for authors to acknowledge this and to have all these observations, because someone needs to read it. It's like, that is one way for authors to at least just say, this is what the world looks like. You might not have seen it, but it's there. And so when you read this and when you go outside, you're like, oh, I didn't notice that before. But, I didn't notice that empanada stand or the restaurant, and now I do. And it's just, this is the entire purpose of literature, is to expand the world. And that's something that's important to me. I can't travel right now. I have 5 kids and I'm at home. I have plenty of things that I'm doing as well. But I absolutely rely on literature to show me what the world looks like outside. I'm in Washington right now, but I was in California, and I've done very minimal traveling. Mostly, my father was a hippie, and so most of it was just camping. And then I stayed a little while in Beijing just on a fluke. And I'm so hungry to know what other people are saying, the language that they're using. And it's not just the language, but it's like, how do we use the language? How are we isolating each other with the language that we use? And how can we also make things more observant using the language that we use? So that's my very long comment on how much I loved this book, or at least this story. So now, I mean, I'm afraid that I'm
You
going to
also
have
have great taste.
I have great taste. I know. And I have a latte fund once a month, and I'm just gonna have to give that up to buy all the rest of your books. So
There's only 4. That's like what, like 2 lattes? Like a latte like $25 or something, right?
yeah, no, that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah, just don't drink 2 lattes. You can buy all the books.
Yeah.
But no, I think Tamarah is exactly right. The purpose of literature is to expand the world, or for me to, explore the human condition, right? So that's why it becomes a question of like, what happens when we become less and less humane? When we are not interested in people's humanity, or not interested in it unless it in some way, improves our own thing, learning about someone so that we can add to our cache of knowledge, rather than learning just because they're a human and they're standing next to us, and it's just, you know, the point of learning, like what happens to us now when we're sitting across tables from each other or sitting next to each other and we're playing on our phones, right? And instead of like talking to the people who are beside us, or we're talking to them and we're not listening. You're like, hey, how you doing? They're like, my dog died. Like, oh yeah, great, thanks. Like clearly you know, like you just, you know, you're just like dialing it, you know, dialing it in. I think earlier in the conversation there was a question of like, you know, does this person have a responsibility to open up? And I think, you know, writers and academics and artists know that we all benefit from having some sort of time and space where we can, you know, disconnect and unplug so that we can concentrate on our work, which is what the narrator does with her sabbatical. But she's clearly opening herself up by then attending the party, right? Like she's on her way out. She doesn't have to do anything other than go to her office and pack her boxes, right? So she's had this sort of space where she's been allowed to be isolated, and now she's trying to reconnect, you know, with her colleagues and attend this party space. And they're, you know, more interested in like the gossip and titillating aspects of her life. Meredith?
Well, first of all, that is a great first line. No one is going to miss you. That was just devastating. And then further on, it says, none of your colleagues offer congratulations or wish you well. No one lifts a glass of wine or toasts. Your colleagues look at you like you're speaking another language. So I'll pause there for a second. It doesn't feel like she is coming back from sabbatical and really wanting to engage with somebody. She, you know, they're asking about, well, what are you going to do with your condo? Are you going to sell it? Or are you renting it out? And I'm trying to follow the quotation marks for when there's actual words spoken. And she says neither. Now she doesn't, as far as I know, she doesn't embellish on it. And so then the next quotes come down. So you're going to leave? You're just going to leave your condo? They ask, unable to mask their accusatory confusion. And so she's not offering a lot of explanation. She's not, doesn't feel like she's putting herself out there and really trying to have a conversation and
About money,
reconnect
no.
with these people. It feels she feels like she's isolated from them. She just wants to go through the motions, you know, say her last goodbyes, deliver the news, say your goodbyes in person, and then she's on to something else.
Well, I guess that's one reading of it, but I think generally speaking, it's understood that it's kind of rude to ask people about like their money, you know, like what what they're going to do with their finances. Like if someone told me that they got a new job at another university, I think my first question would be, well, what are you going to teach there? Or what's your teaching load? What kind of students will you have? You know, questions that are actually about the new job and the new position, not you can afford to not rent out your condo. You have more money than I do. Like that's rude. I mean, the next question would be, how much do you weigh and how old you are? Right? Like there are the things that you don't ask people.
Yeah, good point. I take your point.
Yeah. Stephanie?
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering if approaching the story from another level, more of a theater background that I have, I can't find what the I wants are of this character, or even the faculty. I don't see what anyone cares about. It's clear that no, you know, you're not going to be missed. Nobody cares is implied. And what does she in turn care about? Does she care about any of them or the people there? I think it's a two-way street, it seems. There seems to be a lack of connection and a lack of compassion, a lack of interest. everybody's in their own little individual boxes, and there's no connection. If I were directing it, I wouldn't know, I couldn't tell anybody what the I wants are of the character or the faculty.
I think it's more of her, because at the very beginning, although she's American, but she thinks that she's in foreign land. And that is her perception and attitude, how to emerge into this world, assimilated into this world, but rather already from there is a distance. So when Tamarah said she makes herself invisible and then visible, probably that visibility and the invisibility is always limited to her own comfortable zone, her own home, her own food, her own language, her own cultural customs. So it really, yeah, the questions to ask is a two-way street or it's a one-way street. How she, what is a self-esteem and how she wants to be connected. So I think it's more of her than the world surrounding her.
Well, also just in terms of moving to different places or living in places where it has a different culture. When I moved up from California, it seems like it's a lateral move between the Bay Area and Seattle, and I can absolutely tell you it is not. And it took me a full year to figure out how to not completely offend people in Washington. There are, accepted questions and accepted, like, how open are you? And so when I came up here, it was, you are too intense and you are too much. And so I had to figure out, like, either I go back to California or I dial myself down and I lower the timbre of my voice and I don't have as much energy. And that's what is expected of me here in order to survive in this culture. And that's what I see in the academic culture is there are going to be accepted and expected behaviors that she will have to adhere to in order to maintain a professional relationship with the people around her. And if the questions that they're asking is a reflection of what is expected in the relationships, then I read it very easily that they did not have a personal connection. They were not friends. They were colleagues, and then they went home. And so they were asking her questions that had nothing to do with her bearing as a person or her goals and her dreams, maybe. And so that's how I read it. It just seemed like that was a very cold academic professional relationship. But when she left, she was never inside. She was always outside. She was outside, and it was the public sphere after that, even more so. I mean, your business is a public sphere as well. But she was outside and she was in spaces of liminality like the lobby and doorways, and that allowed her the space to relax and to think, what else have I not seen? And allowing herself to be seen in those places. So that's the way that I read it.
I think what Ava said, I think if I'm saying your name right, about like where is the foreign space, right? You have these characters who are assuming that Miami is the foreign space, but like Ava said, this university in Chicago is also a foreign space for her. It's not like she's in her hometown or something, right? Like academics go where the jobs are. And she's been in this foreign space of this university, this Catholic university. Deschantal is a last name I got from like a famous nun, so that's why it's the name of that university. But she's been in this foreign space, and the assumption seems to be that they just assume that she's been having a good time and that any move can only be sort of like negative, right? They're like, oh, it's going to be different. She's like, yeah, they're right. It is different. But like, it sort of trends upwards, right? Like they like her colleagues are sort of making this assumption that like what you're leaving is the ideal, and what you're going to can only be not even a lateral move, but a downward move. Like the story makes it clear that the university she's leaving for is a major research university, right? So like it's definitely a step up, clearly, and it's in a warmer place. So for most people, like a better job and a warmer climate is usually, like the thing that you're going for, right? But there is just this presumption of like what normalcy is. I wrote this story before this event that I'm about to relay, but I am currently for this 1 year teaching at a university where it's very, very cold. And a colleague, a person who would have been my colleague left and got another job at a place where it's very, very, very warm. And so I only met that person like just once on the way out. But that colleague is now making at least $60,000 or $70,000 more than they previously made, and again is in a very warm, sunny place. But when I first got here and I went to one of the orientation meetings, I overheard some new colleagues sort of like talking about this person and just like really like pitying this person for having left. And I'm like, this person doubled their salary and they don't have to shovel snow, right? Like there's this way that people can't understand that like their space is not always the mainstream or the norm, right? And that it can't be improved upon. It was like the weirdest conversation that I'd like ever like overheard. They're like, oh well, but that place is gonna have droughts. I'm like, okay, droughts or negative 26-degree weather. I don't know. Just...
I feel strange adding this to it, but sometimes there's an assumption that because of what you look like, you're doing is the best you can, and getting another job, that's kind of breaking the mold of what some people think that you're supposed to be able to do. So that seemed to be implied in part of the story, because what she's when people are rude and asking her how is she going to afford things, that in itself is part of that same type of response. Like you shouldn't be able to do better. And how can you do better if you, and how can you afford to have two places to live? You're not supposed to because of who you are. And that, yeah, I mean, that seemed to come through pretty strongly to me.
But there's also a jealousy factor because the other people can't afford it. So it's not necessarily. I think we could never afford to live in two places is implied by the question itself.
Yes.
I don't know how you can do it, meaning I can't do it. So how can you do it is what I think.
Yeah, it's part of the jealousy and infighting and whatever else goes on in college departments. Those of us who've seen some of that know that problem's definitely too.
No, exactly, Sharyn, you're right. Like when Tamarah brought up that line, like I don't know how you can do it. Like there is this also this assumption, right? Like this is the best you can do, and how could you possibly, do more than me? Which is why the character keeps saying because you're you and I'm me. For example, I think I had this conversation. This was like maybe in my first job at St. Joe's, a different Catholic university in Philly. Whenever any academic, you go to orientation, one of the first things, they tell you, your benefits, hey HR, but they tell you like when you would be eligible for your sabbatical. Some places it's 6 years, some places it's 3 years, but they let you know right away like how that clock starts ticking, and they let you know like how much your salary will be decreased. So some places it's 50%, some places it's 75%. And whenever it's time for me to earn my sabbatical, I take the full year, right? Which means that my salary is decreased by whatever percentage that university is decreasing. And like 100% of the time, I run into colleagues that are like, "How can you like afford to do that? Like I can only because typically a university will let you take a quarter or a semester and they'll give you full pay." Right? So there are a lot of people who do that. I'm like, well, if they tell you that 6 years from now, you will have your salary decreased by X percent, you have 6 years to do the math and put the money aside to make that up. That's just simple math. That's not me being smarter than you or more dedicated to you. Like I don't know how you could do it. You do it with a calculator, right? Like it's not a hard thing to do. Like if you want to wait until year 5 and try to replace 50% of your salary, well, you're going to be between a rock and a hard place. But if you want to just actually like use your brain and do the math and take 6 years and divide it, like it's not rocket science.
Right. And she had obviously, that is, this character had obviously planned on this move before.
No, she was recruited.
Right. But what I'm saying is, it seems to me like she's planned how she's going to live more frugally in Miami by renting furniture and so forth and having a smaller place. That's what it sounded like to me, that she had kind of factored in her economics. Does anyone else want to say something? Some of you have been a little bit quiet. No? Okay. Do you want to say anything else about your story, Amina? Or anything about your work? I mean, there's a whole body of work that we haven't heard about.
Gosh, now I'm just like, Sharyn just puts me on the spot.
I don't need to put you on the spot. I'm trying to highlight what you've done.
I would guess I would say that the new collection, the best that you can do, takes a lot of these questions, like who we assume people are and what they're capable of doing or what their limitations should be based on who we think they are, and explores them in shorter form. So the new collection is all very short fiction. It's 57 stories with no story longer than 2,500 words, and quite a few stories that are 500 words. The collection is arranged into 5 thematic groups. And I was on sabbatical during the beginning of the pandemic. I was supposed to be working on a collection that would be inspired by the story we just read. And I didn't have the ability to concentrate and focus on writing full-length stories, right? Like 3,500 to 6,000 word stories. So I just tried to figure out what I could do during that space, because it was, very depressing 2 years. And I got my writing chops back by writing very short pieces and by watching a lot of reruns. I really enjoyed the TV that I grew up with. I thought the writing was very good. I like shows like Love Boat and Fantasy Island and Barney Miller. I know, don't laugh at me. Like Odd Couple still comes on twice a day in Chicago. I watch it. Taxi comes on at night. So watching all these shows and just like reminiscing, thinking back to my childhood and thinking about a lot of nostalgia. So the best that I could do, if you guys have ever seen the movie Arthur with Dudley Moore, you know, it has that song, The Best That You Can Do. And I was just thinking that we're all out here, we all were out here during the pandemic, just trying to figure out what the best we could do was, right? To connect with our loved ones, to stay safe, to keep our creativity, to still find a way to be an artist, or to find ways to pivot, to re-examine what we were doing and who we were, and figure out if that's who we wanted to be. And so the stories are not set during the moment of the pandemic, they're set earlier, but they were inspired by, you know, figuring out what the best we can do, like what's the best we can do in limited circumstances. And so that is the collection that was just published last week.
Okay, and that already won a prize.
Well, it was a prize that came with the publication.
Oh, I see.
Right, like the way I won the Flannery O'Connor, like winning the Flannery O'Connor got the book published.
Right, I get it.
It won't win anything till next year. You know, fingers crossed for that.
Yes, we will. We will. I, you know, you brought up another question that I have. You've been writing full-length stories. How did you have to write was your technique different when you were writing a 500-word story?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I work on flash fiction or short shorts or microfiction or sudden fiction or smoke long, whatever you want to call these pieces, I'm tapping more into my poetry background.
Right.
I'm thinking more, you know, because I think a lot of people think that a short short is basically just like a super short description, but it still has to be a story, right? Like there still has to be a problem, still has to be some kind of resolution, even though it could be incredibly small. There might not be dialogue, right? Or there might be indirect dialogue. But for me, like I have to incorporate lyric or lyricism in with the narrative in order to be able to pull it off in that length, right? But I don't have time to expand. And I'm typically might need a premise, right? When I first started writing fiction, my stories were short, 500 words, 1,000 words, 1,500 words, because nobody had told me like there was a difference, you know? So, you know, like I would turn in a 6-page story and that'd be like 1,500 words. It was only later that I started to think of them as two different forms, right? And I really enjoy writing very short fiction or flash fiction as a way to challenge myself, as a way to make sure that I'm being precise and concise, and as a way of making sure that I'm using language to its fullest extent.
Okay, that's a good explanation. Well, if no one else has questions, I think we can wrap up. And I really enjoyed talking with you, and I think other people did too.
It's been a pleasure. I'm really sorry about the beginning.
Oh, that was
so much.
That was no problem. We have some leeway with the time, so that was okay. That was fine. And I'm glad you did too. And I'm glad it worked out with the, some of you may have noticed that we switched her position in the book. So I'm glad that worked out too.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much
Thanks very much. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye, everybody.